welcome back. Let's get started again with our next topic. Now, if the dust is all settled from modernism, how it's affected the church, Christianity, science, culture, government, all of that, and including our own way of looking at life, we're going to get into things that should stir up the pot even a little bit more today. As modernism developed as a theory and became almost universal in many ways, shapes, and forms, at least within modern industrialized societies and the more what would be called sometimes advanced nations of the world, there came with it also an increasing sense of disillusionment. That happened in a way that probably should have been obvious and even foreseeable, but yet somehow was missed by all of these great thinkers. You see, modernism promised a utopia in this world. Life was going to get better. Prosperity would abound. Everyone would have a good life. Disease would be conquered. There'd be no more war. Just like it was this utopian idea of how good things would get and how quick. Many felt that would easily happen within one lifetime or two at most. Christianity adopted that to some degree too, and in the late 1800s people talked about the coming Christian century. The idea that Christianity and modernity were unified in this sense of growing prosperity and well-being of people here on this earth. The spiritual and the miraculous were eliminated or ignored or explained away as the ignorance of the people seeing things that were happening and not understanding what was going on or how it was happening. With all of this, then, there built this incredible optimism at the last part of the 1800s, the early part of the 1900s. A couple of events occurred then which seriously called into question that entire event. Certainly one was the great flu pandemic that hit in the early part of the 1900s. It killed hundreds of thousands of people, and this scientific medicine that was supposed to cure all ills stood by helplessly watching as they could do nothing to stop the deaths. Strong young men would go to work in the morning, they'd collapse at noon, and they'd be dead by that evening. It happened that quickly, and it took people that were not normally the ones you would be considered to be at risk. As if that wasn't enough in and of itself, some Christians still continued to prophesy the soon coming of our Lord and the end of this world and this utopian eternity. Some of those prophesied that Jesus' return had to be imminent because everything had been fulfilled. The scientific people who denied Christianity and any spirituality were saying no, it would come, but in the form of technological resolution to all of our problems, and that we'd all have the good life. And it was right at this moment that events overtook that optimism and seriously shook the foundations of modernism. And that event was the breaking out of World War I. From a seemingly almost insignificant event, at least as far as the world is concerned, soon all of Europe was engulfed in this devastating war which killed millions upon millions of people. The war ended in a truce, and supposedly it was the war to end all wars. In other words, the death throes of what had been the old system, and it would then usher in the new system. It was a desperate attempt to bring victory out of defeat, and it was easily seen as unsuccessful. The reason was it wasn't that many years until the war to end all wars actually provoked the Second World War, which turned out to be even more horrible and devastating than the First World War. And the millions of people that died now became the tens of millions of people that were killed or were died. And what was called a world war but was largely a European war, this second time engulfed nearly the entire globe, as war raged in Asia, in Europe, and in which America was deeply involved in both of those theaters. With all of those things then, many people soon began to realize things weren't playing out as what they had imagined, and all the good that was supposed to have come was merely an illusion, a false promise. Even on some of the more basic realms, modernity failed to produce the promises that it had given. One example was medicine. Medicine was supposed to cure all ills. It was supposed to find the solution to all problems. When I was a young fellow, they were talking about the war on cancer, and they openly prophesied at that time that cancer would become like having the cold, a mere bother or difficulty that you could overcome in a few days of good treatment. We know now, some 50 years later, the war on cancer was not successful, and we're probably not a whole lot closer to curing that disease than we were even back then. Treatments may have improved a little bit. They may be a little bit less devastating, but they certainly haven't cured cancer, and it continues to crop up with a tragic frequency. All of the promises of modernity then turned out to be false promises and false leads. The optimism was unfounded, and that was readily seen. This started to give way fairly early to postmodernism, to a different philosophy that would reject many of the principles of modernism. It was a new philosophy that would start to undermine modernism using the very tools and theories and mechanisms that modernism had used to deconstruct Christianity and to deconstruct many of the worldviews that it itself had replaced. And so people simply took the very same mechanisms and they used those and applied those to modernity itself. And modernity was found wanting. It was found lacking. It could not stand up to the very scrutiny that it had applied to others. One of the ways that modernism was used to destroy much of the faith in Christianity was pointing out how Christianity had often been subverted and used by the rich and the powerful to sustain themselves, to enrich themselves, and to accomplish what they wanted to accomplish. It soon became pretty obvious that the people who were involved in modernism were doing that exact same thing. The people that criticized others getting wealthy by their access to knowledge and to privilege, the knowledge of spiritual things and the privilege of the position they occupied, soon began to realize that the very college professors that proposed those concepts and that attacked Christianity on that basis had now become those who held the reins of power and received the benefits of privilege, and they defended it by proposing a philosophy and a theory that sustained their position of privilege and of wealth. And so in postmodernism then, they began to deconstruct much of these foundations of modernism. The only thing about postmodernism, it really doesn't replace it with anything significant. It points out the problems of modernism, but it doesn't provide answers or solutions. It deals with some of the shortcomings of that modernist theory, but it does not replace them with anything that offers any hope of anything better. And so as a result, it seems like modernism is in many ways simply the collapse. Postmodernism is simply the collapse of modernism. It's the rubbish heap that's left over after the collapse of this grandiose theory. As we look at postmodernism, then, it certainly doesn't provide an answer to the problems that humanity faces. It certainly doesn't provide an answer to those difficulties that still challenge our human existence here on this earth. What modernism does do, it opens a door once again for those of us who do know some of the answers to the problems we face, who do have solutions of some of these difficulties, with an opportunity to at least speak once again on the public stage. Hopefully we'll do a better job this second time than what we did the first time around. Hopefully we will avoid it once again becoming a sense of power and privilege and an opportunity to genuinely share as we work together for a better world, not out of a position of arrogance and superiority, but as Dwight L. Moody would have once said, as one beggar telling another beggar where to find bread. Postmodernism accepts once again the possibility of other knowledge systems. It accepts again the possibility that there are truths of which we do not personally know and cannot find out in a laboratory, such as spiritual realities. It accepts the possibility that other people might have knowledge that we don't have, and that their knowledge might well be every bit as valuable as our knowledge. In doing all of that, it does open the door where we as Christians then can share a knowledge that we have, that we can share a truth that we know, and where we can share an opportunity where all peoples can once again hope to live in a sense of brotherhood and peace, and where we react to one another out of a sense of love and appreciation rather than superiority and exploitation. As we look at the world around us then, postmodernism opens that door. And it gives us an opportunity to take the very best that Christ has offered us in his teaching, in his word, and share it with people in an effort to make this world a better place, all the while as we wait for that eternal paradise in which we can share together in heaven as God's children. That's the opportunity that postmodernism offers to those of us who live by faith.